What's up, everybody? Garrett here, back in the Move.W.Murph channel. And today, I want to do a review of the most expensive piece of backpacking gear I have ever bought in my entire life. And it is the ZPacks Duplex 2-person backpacking tent. Over the years, I've used a large quantity of backpacking tents. I've borrowed a bunch from friends. I've used 3-person, 2-person, 1-person, bivy bags, tons of alternatives. I have done so much research trying to find the lightest possible option with enough compromise. Like, I'm from the Midwest, and back home there are bugs, so we need bug protection. But when I was out west of Montana, I used a bivy bag all the time, and I just slept on the ground in that because it didn't rain that much and there weren't very many insects. And my first ever backpacking tent that I bought myself was the Big Agnes Fly Creek Ultralight 2. You probably have heard of that tent if you've been in the game for a couple of years. At that time, back in 2012, maybe when I bought it, 2010, maybe 2008, I don't know, I can't remember. That was the most expensive thing I'd ever bought. I saved all my money. I was a kid. I did all my research, and that was at the time the lightest, most advanced tent on the market that I know of. Other than maybe Tarp Tent was making the Double Rainbow, which was lighter, but different. And I'd always had been apprehensive to buy a tent that did not come with tent poles. Because I was like, man, these trekking poles, are they really gonna hold up? This tension style tent, I don't really know how this is going to last and hold up over my time on the trail. I was always apprehensive to do that. And then even furthermore, spending $700 on a piece of cloth that's stitched together with some mesh, that's a huge investment. This is the most expensive thing I've ever bought for backpacking. Hands down. Was it worth it? At the end of this video, I'm going to throw in a suggestion of a tent that's, I find, very similar to this, very similar features, but roughly half the cost, so stick around for that. And if you have a lighter, simpler alternative to this duplex, leave a comment below. I want to know. I'm genuinely curious what we are working with out there on the market these days. This tent, it saw a lot of use on this trail, and after 1,800 miles, 3,000 kilometers, this is going to be my review of the ZPacks Duplex 2-person tent. Let's get into it. I'm going to set this thing up. So this tent comes in at 48 inches tall. It is 45 inches wide and 7.5 feet long. So that's plenty long to accommodate most hikers. I really didn't have much of an issue length or width wise, and that was with 2 people in the tent. And it has a total square footage of the interior of 28.1 square feet. It packs down to 6 inches by 12 inches, which is pretty small. You saw at the beginning of the video. And honestly, it can compress a little bit more than that. If you're really being efficient while packing, you can really cram some stuff around it because there's no tent poles inside that bag. And I elected to keep my stakes outside of it just because I don't want to get a puncture inside of my bag. I generally just kept the stakes outside of the bag. Getting to weight, they claim that it's 525 grams, and that is the stuff sacks, all of the things that you see here, minus the trekking poles and the tent stakes. Those are not included in the weight. After using this thing for a few months, I ended up weighing it myself, and it came in at 600 grams total. And that has to do with probably just dirt. I pick up a lot of dirt. You can get this thing only so clean. So that's where we landed on that. The claimed weight is 525 grams, no stakes, and I ended up at 600. It does require 8 stakes in order to set this up, or you could use some rocks or get really creative, but essentially because this is a tension tent, it requires stakes. That's kind of a problem if you're really camping somewhere quite rocky or sandy, but generally I had no issues pitching this tent ever. It is $700, which is, wow. That is one of the most daunting factors of this tent as a whole, is that price. And then it is made out of DCF, which is a completely waterproof fabric that is quite light. and was initially invented to use for sailing. They would make the sails out of this material. And then some clever hiker somewhere along the way was like, oh my God, it's very strong, and it is very light, and it is waterproof. Let's start making tents out of it. And that's what ended up with these types of tents. The other cool thing is that they give you a lifespan of roughly 2,500 miles on this tent, which is at least one long trail. And if you were not doing a through hike with this tent, it would easily last a lifetime. One of the biggest deterrents for me over the years of buying a tent like this, where you require trekking poles to set it up, was that I'm not always carrying trekking poles. A lot of times I'm bike touring, to be honest. I don't want to carry trekking poles while I'm on my bike, and that was the biggest limitation of a tent like this for me. And ZPack sells poles that you can use in lieu of trekking poles that would be just straight up to those peaks right there. They're 2 carbon fiber poles that are perfectly straight. They fold up, and that's great if you're going to be on a bike, or if you're in a place that's really rocky and you know you're going to struggle pitching this tent. They also have a freestanding kit for this tent as well, that are 2 flexible poles that will make this a completely freestanding tent. And once I saw that, I was like, I'm sold. That is the tent for me. It's so versatile that you can pitch it with stakes and trekking poles on a through hiking trail. You can make it a freestanding with their freestanding kit, or you can just forego the whole trekking poles completely, and you can use their straight poles to set this thing up. That, in my opinion, is a game changer and took the cake completely. This tent has 2 doors and 2 vestibules. So if you are sharing it with another person, like I was, it is really easy to store your gear, keep your shoes dry, keep some of that gear dry, and also when you get up to pee in the middle of the night, you are going to have way less issue bumping into that person. I felt there was plenty of space for 2 people. Some of the things I really loved about this tent. First and foremost, this is lighter than most one-person shelters out there on the market, but you can put 2 people in it. So splitting this weight between me and my partner made my life so much easier out on that trail. That is, you cannot, it's so hard to even find a one-person shelter that can beat this weight. The only way to do it is buy a ZPack one-person shelter, basically, or get really creative. But as far as a full protection shelter is concerned, this is lighter than most one-person setups, and you can fit 2 in it. You can easily just take this by yourself, and it's still a very light tent. The other thing I loved about this tent is it's been extremely easy to get set up. I honestly thought I was going to run into more issues setting this tent up, where I wouldn't be able to get stakes in the ground or it wasn't going to fit. I never had any issues getting this thing set up. At the longest days, I was still like, no problem. The first 2 or 3 times you set it up, it's definitely a bit of a learning curve, but once you figure it out, it's the easiest thing in the world. Get 8 stakes in the ground, tension it all up, you're sleeping, you're done. The other thing I really loved about this tent was that you do not need a ground sheet. And it's per ZPack's recommendation that they made their floor in the bathtub twice as thick as the rest of the tent in order to not carry a ground sheet. My least favorite thing is carrying a ground sheet. I hate doing it. They're so dirty. It's just one extra thing, and I feel like they're always blowing away in the wind when I'm trying to set this thing up. So no ground sheet has been key. I don't need to carry that extra weight, and it just is additional weight on top of the claimed weight from the manufacturer in the first place. The other thing I loved was how versatile it is. You can open and close these vestibule doors. There's 4 doors altogether. Each one of those flaps, you can open and close depending on if the wind's coming from your toes, at your head, if it's really hot or really cold. You can really customize this tent essentially to really ventilate to the best of your ability. And even if you want to, you can raise that peak height up a little bit and get even more flow underneath it. Even if it was lightly raining, you can open up both vestibule doors because there's an overhang from the roof over the bathtub. There are so many features in this tent that are so simple. It really had everything that I wanted and nothing that I didn't. And there were very few things that I think that this tent was missing. Overall, simple, easy, great design. Things that I did not necessarily love about this tent. It's a short list, but the bathtub floats. There's no stakes that hold that bathtub down. So I really didn't always love that when it was really windy, that bathtub floor would start to lift up or kind of slide and move around. And related to that was, if you're really camping on quite a steep slope, that bathtub can slide. And one day, it was a pretty steep slope. I had slid the foot box of my sleeping bag out of the end of this tent, and the roof was just dumping water straight into it. And that was a huge bummer because my sleeping bag got soaked that night, and I let a lot of water into the tent. So that was a bummer. And then another thing that I didn't necessarily love, if you're camping on some really hard ground, the backsplash from the sides of the tent can sometimes splash up into the tent. So if it's raining really hard and there are pools collecting around your tent, the splashing from the dripping off the roof will come back into the tent. That I didn't love. With any single wall tent, you're going to have condensation issues. And I had some condensation issues with this, although I was shocked with how well this tent managed condensation generally. Like I said, with being able to open all the doors up, even if it was raining just a little bit, I sometimes would be camping on a slope and I would slide down and just touch the roof. And if you're touching the roof with your feet, it stops that water from rolling out of the tent as it's designed to do, and it just rolls right onto your sleeping bag. So there were a couple of days where I woke up with wet foot box on my sleeping bag, but I think that would have been an issue given any single wall tent, given how I pitched it personally. So that is definitely some user error. If you can find a perfectly level spot, that 7.5 feet of length is plenty of room to keep your head and feet away from those walls. And if you were using this by yourself, you really wouldn't have much of an issue at all. And the last thing I really don't like is that $700 price tag. That's pretty steep, generally speaking, for a tent that's not a 4-season tent and isn't for mountaineering. That, I think, is a really high price to pay. And, you know, they are the pioneers. They made the best through hiking tent there is out there, in my opinion, given all that information. After still 3,000 kilometers, I still believe that this is the best tent out there. As far as a 3-season tent is concerned, for the weight and the strength, versatility, the amount of ventilation, bug protection, you cannot do better than this tent. The lightest, most compact, most versatile tent on the market, in my opinion, today, is the ZPacks Duplex. And I did so much research. I love this thing. It has very little actual problems. There was no seam ripping, no leaking, no any issues after all of that time. I love the tent, and I would buy it again. And I'm gonna buy it again, I'm sure. I also want to buy a one-person version of this. I love ZPacks as a whole. I'm not being paid to say these things. I'm not endorsed by ZPacks. Unless you guys want to endorse me, I would love that, but I'm not. I believe in this company. I think they make excellent products. I think this is one of the best places you could put your money, especially for dropping the weight of the big 3. This would be a huge weight saver. My initial fear of the trekking poles. One day I was sleeping in this tent through a huge storm and it was windy and crazy. It dawned on me that a trekking pole can hold up my entire body weight and then some. I can really support myself on a trekking pole. I don't know what made me think it wouldn't support a tent through some wind. That trekking pole and these stakes, as long as you have them staked well into the ground, that thing's not going anywhere. Versus a tent pole, which is extremely flexible and definitely could not hold up my weight. So the other recommendation of a tent that I have is the Gossamer Gear 2. That tent comes in at $375 US. So it's a much cheaper alternative. It's almost half the price as this tent. And it is a pretty good value for your money. It has a very similar design with 2 doors. There's room for 2 people, and it is still quite light. It is a different material. It's not DCF. Comes in at 667 grams, which is heavier by quite a bit than the ZPacks. It is almost 20% heavier, but at half the price, that's pretty amazing. It packs down to 5 inches by 11 inches, so it's slightly more condensed, and it is a smaller interior. But it has all of the features essentially that this tent has, other than it does not come with DCF. So it might not be nearly as durable as this tent, and it's a bit heavier. But for the compromise, that was my second choice. that Gossamer Gear too. And that's definitely worth a look if you are in the market for a tent. Go check that out. And that's gonna wrap it up for me today. I love this tent. Go check one out. If your friend has one, give it a try. It's so simple, it's so easy to use. It has everything you need and nothing you don't. So, thanks for watching.